What's the registration look? Check, check, check. Check, 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 check. Check, check, check. Check, 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 check. Mic check. Mic check. 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 Check, check. Check. Check, check. Check, check.
Test, test, test.
Huh?
Test, test, test. Test, test, test.
Were you on board?
Test, test, test.
Check, check.
You see now? None of them line up. They see it. They skip channels. Absolutely not. We have to look it up. I don't know if they're on like open channels. So like this is labeled 1020. Oh. These are on like different channels. They changed it. No, they just changed it. It's like a free channel.
check. Check, check, check.
This one feels a little loud. Alright, sit.
Mic, check. Check.
Check.
Microphone check.
Check.
And some lav mics, I'll get that.
Sometimes we usually have a podium, just like right in front of us. I'll just stand there with my I am getting it. Hey. You can grab mine because it's just a plug-in. And it's
Okay.
just, let me just see if that would
With Bluetooth? No, you're right. Don't.
Test, test, test.
On.
What is it? Now this is 1L.
check, check, check.
Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. It's too low. Test, test, test.
Check, check, check.
Test, test, test.
Microphone check.
Test, test, test. Test, test, test. It's loud. Test, test, test. Alright, test that one.
We also have the volume really high.
Is this what it is? I guess I can turn this down.
Yeah, just turn everything down.
I think that's good. There's still room here. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Yours should be on, yeah. Yours to A2.
Check,
I don't. It would be ideal if, since this is on your left side, if you were on the right, so other people.
Okay, so just tell them I need to be on the right. They'll listen.
You'll be on the
Check, 1, 2.
side.
Yeah, right. So, right. Put me on that. Yeah. Mic'd up. Mic number 2. You can probably turn me down now. You want to turn me off? Out across the country a little bit now, so getting out there, seeing the, salt of the earth.
The role change.
It has. So my focus now is
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning in a moment. If you would find a chair, that would be outstanding. Thank you.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. It's a lot easier to do this. There you go.
Good morning. If y'all could find a seat, that would be great. course you can. Just give me a hard time. Got your badge off. Great. Good. Great. Good morning. Let a few more people grab their seats. Good morning. I know it's quite early. We thank you for getting up and joining us this morning. All right. I hope you'll bear with me. There are a lot of data points today, and I do need my notes for this presentation. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Maria Thacker, and I'm President and CEO for Georgia Bio. I want to take a minute and introduce the organization. Georgia Bio is the life sciences trade association that supports the life sciences industry here in Georgia. We really do cover a wide variety of sectors within the industry: classic biotechnology companies, pharmaceuticals, medical device, some digital health companies, and of course we have a broad membership in with our academic institutions, not only research universities but also our technical schools. And we have a number of government groups and service providers involved. Here are some of our top life sciences employers here in Georgia. So some of these names you will recognize, and we have dropped in additionally a few of our larger biotech companies, such as Takeda, who's here today, and Arbor Pharmaceuticals is a few others. So we do cover a wide variety of areas in the sector. And life sciences, as you'll see in a moment, is really starting to grow pretty rapidly here in Georgia. So a number of our universities are a member, like I mentioned earlier, and I will say that we do work closely with CDC as well in their Office of Technology Transfer. They're a great asset, and they actually helped to establish the organization. So Georgia Bio this year is 30 years old as an organization. It's been really running as a formal trade association, doing government affairs support and economic development on behalf of the sector for about 15 years. So I'm going to dive into the numbers, but first I want to preface this by saying I'm planning to put most of our time this morning into allowing our esteemed speakers to really have a great conversation about where we envision the industry moving. But the report is sponsored by a number of our institutions, not only here in Georgia, but also out of DC, and we'll recognize them at the end. But the report was conducted by RTI International through their RTP office, and it was a privilege to work with them. But our resource data points were a variety of different resources here in Georgia. So Georgia Research Alliance, Georgia Power, TAG, the Technology Association of Georgia, Georgia Department of Economic Development, and quite a few others. And I apologize, I am forgetting a couple of them. But there are a number of data sets that were used to pull this information together. Additionally, the report will not be rolling out for formal download and printing for the general consumer for about 4 to 6 weeks. We plan to do it right before the Biotechnology Innovation Organization's convention. The Bio Convention's in early June, and that is when we get a lot of interest, and we participate in a large pavilion at that large convention that is the largest gathering of biotechnology of the industry in the world. So we really wanted to save that rollout for that big event when we get a lot of hits to our website and to our companies here in Georgia. But I did want to touch on a few things. So as you can see, the contribution to the state here, it's over $21 billion in economic impact, nearly 200,000 jobs, 1.6 billion in labor income, and over 3,000 establishments. So when we did this study in 2012, there were less than 500. So this has been a big jump, and part of that reason is we also are starting to include digital health in our count here. So that does contribute to some of that. This does also include agriculture, feedstock, and industrial biosciences as well. But the bulk of our sector is in the research, testing, and medical laboratory space, with a quick follow-up in general distribution and medical devices as the next largest sectors. So on this next slide, I'm going to touch on the private sector economic growth. So we have 43,700 plus private sector jobs that are attributed to the life sciences here, and we've seen a 14.9% employment growth in the last decade. 32.3% growth in private sector establishments, and compared to just 1% for all other industries in Georgia. So that's a pretty significant jump in one sector compared to everything else in the state. So we are seeing rapid growth, which I believe is just a lot of opportunities for us to really grow. We have 8,000 people employed in research, testing, and medical labs, and 7,000 in the medical device manufacturing space, and 3,200 in biopharmaceuticals. I think it's important to point out that our NIH SBIR STTR funding that was distributed was $21.9 million in funding in Georgia since 2010, and that funding has nearly doubled in growth with approximately 50%, which compared to the rest of the U.S., which is just about a 53% growth. So we nearly doubled in Georgia in growth in that investment from NIH, whereas in everywhere else they only had a 50% growth. So that was pretty outstanding to see that. And we'll touch on some of those research universities in a moment. One other point of fact is we saw fewer job losses during the recession in this sector than any other sector in the state of Georgia. So that was one thing. We are very stable. It is not the same case in other states that have significant life sciences. So we were a little unique, and it was a little surprising to see that particular fact come out of the study, to see that we really could maintain momentum a little bit and get through that recession and that point during our economic downturn. So average pay, as many of you know, is very high in this sector, one of the highest paid sectors. Really, it's in the manufacturing sectors you see that average pay being over $100,000 a year. This is a 10 to 15% increase from since 2012. So that's always good to see, and it's a great point to get young people excited about science as they know it's going to be a high-paying industry. All right, I realize this will be hard to see, but this really represents the number of patents granted. The top recipients for patents in Georgia are actually AT&T and NCR, shortly followed by Emory University, Georgia Tech, Morehouse, and UGA, and our research universities. The frequent patent assignments to these large research universities are for the universities focused primarily in microbiology and biochemistry and things like that. The pharmaceutical company patents tend to be focused more on the drugs and pharmaceuticals. The primary driver is medical device and surgical devices. Quickly, they're followed thereafter by drugs and pharmaceutical patents awarded. For AT&T and NCR, the reason that they're the highest, they tend to focus primarily in the digital health space with their patents, and a lot of biometric imaging patents awarded to them. So clinical trials. Most of our clinical trials do take place in phase 3. There are over 30,000 taking place in Georgia at a given time. And they're really particularly taking place in drug discovery. I think those in the industry here in Georgia are not surprised by that, but I think it's something that we can definitely tout as an area that we do run a lot of trials in, and we do think that's a potential growth area for attracting new companies to conduct trials here in Georgia, and it's something we do try to work closely with the State Department of Economic Development in to try and attract a number of trials to the state. So venture capital and investment. This is an area that we definitely want to try and boost and get more investment into the state, into our innovations here in Georgia. Venture-backed companies in the life sciences with active deals in Georgia have raised over $780 million in funding, primarily with later stage VCs and corporate funds. Companies in drug discovery and therapeutic devices have raised the most venture funding. I do think there are some opportunities for the state to consider more investments into to help encourage growth, especially at our small and mid-sized companies, to really try and boost this investment into the sector, because it will pay off in many returns. And I'm just going to touch on some conclusions. I realize I've kind of powered through this, but I do want time for our conversation here. So really, the life sciences sector in Georgia is resilient and growing. That was proven as we look at how we withstood the recession. We employ a mix of occupations that required a broad range of skill sets. So we hire out of the high school students with just high school degrees. We work closely with our technical colleges, those with bachelor degrees and advanced degrees. So there's a lot of opportunities for broad people with different skill sets to get engaged at the sector. Research funding to institutions and small businesses based in Georgia has steadily been increasing over 10 years, and it's growing at a rate faster than the national average. Research is also crucial to the industry, and we need to understand how these new technologies can really benefit patients in terms of efficacy and safety and things like that. And finally, as new technologies mature and meet critical development milestones, investors and VCs provide funding to help companies with market potential scale. One thing I am going to note, because we did encompass digital health in this particular report, we are seeing an especially high rate of life sciences and health IT converging in the state of Georgia compared to other states. Digital health does contribute to the largest number of direct jobs. About 15,000 of those jobs are attributed to digital health. But despite this, there is a low output of patents and venture activity directly related to health IT. So that is a little bit of a difference there. So I think many in our community, working closely with GDEC, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and IHID and TAG, to really explore what digital health means for us, not only here in Atlanta, but as a state, and how we might really start to grow in this sector and be a premier location for this particular space because of our unique capabilities and technology here. So that is the high-level preview of our report. The report, like I said, will roll out in about 4 to 6 weeks. It'll be downloadable from our website, a PDF. It will also include a list of all the companies here in Georgia. We find that one of the most valuable tools, not just for our job seekers, but for our companies that are trying to recruit executive talent here. They see there's opportunities for growth and momentum in the sector. And it's really just a valuable tool when we go out and promote the state of Georgia, like we will at BIO and in the fall at AdvaMed. Please remember to reach out to us. I've got an outstanding staff of resources. I've got Christina Forbes in the back and Joseph Santoro. I do need to thank them. They've helped me pull together a lot of this information from RTI we've received in the last week or so. And they're new to Georgia Bio. I know a lot of you are coming to me used to coming to me for the last decade, but please know that they're outstanding resources. Joseph and has been working closely with Sally from Cornerstone, our lobbyist, to really try and work to be that voice for you down at the state capitol. And we look forward to really fleshing out a more in-depth and broader legislative agenda moving into the next session in 2020. We're here to be the voice on behalf of the sector, whether that's in the classic bioscience space or the medtech space. So really look to us as a staff, and we look forward to really re-envisioning the organization in the coming months and being really that voice for you all. So with that, and I appreciate your patience with my notes here because I was not going to remember everything as we're still finalizing details on some of the report data. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists here. So if you will allow a moment, I am going to have some chairs pulled up on stage. But I believe John will be asking the panelists to introduce themselves, though I think obviously the Lieutenant Governor needs no introduction, but I do think he can touch on his history and his relevance in history and innovation and understanding the sector a little bit. Christina, can you pull those up? Thanks. One final note, I forgot. Hello to our friends in Augusta and Athens. I know we have a number of people watching this online, so we are a statewide organization, and we're new to streaming this, so this is our first time streaming. We're very excited about that. You're good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Maria. Very happy to be here and meet with you guys. We're excited about the panel we have today. Obviously, as Maria said, the Lieutenant Governor needs no introduction, but Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan is here. Entrepreneur, several healthcare startups, perfect person to be here on the panel today. Lieutenant Governor, would you like to come up and have a seat? Thank you. Joe from UCB is here as well. He runs the U.S. Government Affairs for UCB, a large healthcare biopharmaceutical company here in Georgia, if you don't mind coming up. And Russell is with GRA, CEO, President. Obviously, most of you know him as well, and we're excited to have him on the panel. Thank you. So, love to get started with the Lieutenant Governor. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for being here.
You can call me Jeff.
Okay, Jeff, great. That
Sounds a whole lot better.
That makes it a lot easier, a little bit quicker. Thanks for joining us today. We know you just wrapped up your first session as Lieutenant Governor, and under your leadership, the legislature passed a number of critical issues for Georgia, including Medicaid waivers, step therapy protocols for patients with chronic diseases to help them with their treatment become more efficacious. We know you did great work, as we were discussing earlier, in the areas of telehealth that we're excited about, and UCB in particular has great interest in that. Oversaw a $27.5 billion budget that includes $3,000 in pay increases for certified teachers across the state, so thank you for that as well. I think we'd all love to hear some of your insights into the session, some of the successes that you think you had, and I think some of the challenges as well.
Well, great. Thanks for having me here today. And it was great to watch this presentation because, you know, I didn't grow up in politics. I grew up in business, and I'm probably the only lieutenant governor who's ever been the CEO of a healthcare IT company, and certainly one who's ever sat in a room trying to beg a VC for seed money, round A and Series B money. And so I look through that lens and have that perspective that many of you face and understand how important innovation is to growth and definitely understand how hard it is to get something off the ground. Great session. You know, I had all kinds of mixed emotions. You spend 2.5 years begging for a job that you don't really understand all the ins and the outs, and walked into the session and just really absolutely enjoyed it. There's three parts to the role of Lieutenant Governor. There's the policy part, which is really what drew me to the position. You know, I can't stand politics. It really irks me when somebody tries to outflank me politically, either, you know, create a better relationship or try to cut your legs out and ignore the policy. So you've got that part. You've got the relationship building amongst 56 other, you know, senators in the room, and that was one I've enjoyed doing. But the presiding officer part is what I really, really enjoyed. As the Lieutenant Governor, you're the President of the Senate, and so we got to walk through a session where we intentionally took on some big issues. We passed 22 healthcare bills in the General Assembly this year, 22. Previous session, the General Assembly passed 1. And I told a group of folks the other day, that didn't happen by accident. That was intentional. Because I believe that we've got 11 million Georgians expecting us to do more on healthcare than what we currently are. And I think we've got to create an ecosystem, right? And it's not just one arrow, right? We're just not going to create, you know, telemedicine's not going to be our only path forward, but it's going to be an important path. Innovation is going to be a path forward. Investment and how we attract that. But ultimately, all that's got to come together to create an ecosystem here that folks, not only citizens want to come here and live here and retire here, but businesses want to come here and grow here. Startups come here and want to bring their big ideas because they have access to great institutions and capital and all those things that really come together. So really, my big idea in Georgia is I want this to be an ecosystem that allows us to continue to grow and to be, I believe we have a chance to really lead the entire country on a lot of big issues, and healthcare is one of them.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're all eager to see what's next there. Russell, obviously Jeff has already had some impressive success. 22 bills versus 1. That's crazy. That is a crazy number. And we've seen some nice growth in life sciences over the last 10 years, as Maria showed us. 15% employment growth. That represents 40,000 jobs in the private sector. What do you think, the report that Maria summarized earlier, what do you think about the correlation between research investments and industry growth? And on that same point, do you see any warning signs that we should be considering here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's all about, as Jeff said, it's all about the ecosystem, and so Georgia Research Alliance is designed to help build that. And the way we do that is to capitalize on the research enterprise at our great universities. So we've been doing that for close to 30 years. We invest in 3 areas to accomplish that. First is talent and infrastructure, recruiting eminent scholars to the universities, and then helping fund their research via equipment. Our second category is our startup formation, and we have Lee and Connor here today who are in our venture development team. And they issue grants and startup loans to help get those companies started. And lastly, we have a venture fund that invests further down the road, equity investments into growth companies. But as a result of those investments in research, I think we can see that correlation to growth of the industry. And yes, there are warning signs. GRA's funding decreased for a period of time. We've been holding steady, but we've talked to the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor and the legislature about what our future needs are, and we're going to deliver a plan this summer to them that will demonstrate what we think our ROI will be if we invest further into supporting our research enterprise here. And the blips that I see, I've been through the report, of course, and while everything is trending in the right direction, we have seen, and you will see when you find the report, the number of companies, the company growth itself is starting to taper. There was actually, I think, a little bit of a decline in 2017, and that's the startup environment, right? We need to create and have an environment where it's friendly for more startups, and that comes largely, not entirely, but largely from our research universities. Our research universities, especially in life sciences, are sort of the base for creating these startups in life sciences. And then the second thing I'll say is everybody in this room knows a problem that we've had for quite some time, and that is our disconnect, our physical disconnect from one another. It's great to have a good crowd here today. We come together, through Georgia Bio, and we're connected virtually. We need to be connected physically. We need to be connected literally, and so we're working together to explore options for creating an innovation district. You've heard us talk about this at the summit and other times. But that district will then connect to life science hubs around the state, including at the universities. And by doing that, by communicating better together and having a more conducive environment for networking, I think we'll see better growth in the industry going forward.
That's great. I really, the physical disconnect really resonates. People, have a tendency to communicate electronically now, and obviously that's very important. So how do we stay globally competitive and increase our impact here in Georgia? Joe, any comment about that, or Russell?
So I think it kind of goes back to what Jeff and Russell have been talking about, and that is that we've got to create incentives where the smart people want to stay in Georgia, because that's where the ideas come from in terms of science. It all begins with science. Science is so important to everything we do. It's our compass, and I think the university research centers here in Georgia with the NIH funding is very, very important. It's something that we watch in Washington, D.C., and we fight to protect to make sure that we can get those dollars in Georgia, because so much of the lab science that happens in Georgia, it helps with the discovery in terms of molecules and targets and those kind of things that end up in drug development, clinical trials, et cetera. So I think that keeping the smart people in Georgia is part of it. And then I think the other piece of it is opening up capital. So what can we do creatively as policymakers here in Georgia kind of grapple with this? So in order to keep the smart people in Georgia, you've got to provide opportunities. Jobs have got to be here. And it often happens with some of these smaller startup companies that are looking for capital. So ways that we can open up capital for those companies and keep people connected, as Russell said, in a real physical way, not just in a virtual way.
And to that point, to keep talent here, we've got to make sure talent knows they're talented, right? So SB 108 this year was a bill that went directly at this. So technology every business is a technology company right now, right? I mean, whether you're a biotech company, whether you're Delta Airlines or a lawnmower shop, you're using technology to run your business, to grow your business. So less than 0.5% of high school students are currently graduating with any sort of computer science curriculum in their high school. It's ridiculous, right? You would never describe that as a 21st century education model, that 0.5% of kids are graduating. So we put a bill in place that requires every high school to at least introduce these kids to technology through at least one class of a computer science curriculum, and then we matched it in the budget with funding to train the teachers at each school. And so every industry, you can tell the success by the talent that industry is able to capture. And so we need to continue to maintain that talent here. We need to get more in the pipeline that wants to call Georgia home. And so I think we got to start. We can't start too early. I mean, I've got a second grader that can use any sort of technology better than I mean, I slide my Mac across the table often. I'm like, how do I do this? Right? And he's 8. Because it's just the way they think. And so that's the way we're going to solve problems in the next generation is through technology.
That's a great point.
Great point. Back to grants, as you were alluding to. Georgia Bio promotes tax incentives, obviously, to support emerging tech companies. We know SBIR and STTR grants are incredibly important for some of these small companies. 28 states have created matching grant programs for the recipients of those grants from the NIH in particular. Do you think Georgia should or could enact similar measures as those other states?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. Anytime that we put investment in innovation, no matter how early in what we call, I guess, the innovation chain is important. So anytime we can put investment early on in some of the bench science, and all the way through discovery, drug development, delivery to patients, anywhere we can provide investment incentives, I think is important. And I think that here in Georgia, we're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, I agree. Back to the employees and workforce development and talent, as you touched on. It's obviously in the top of the mind for industries across the state, not just the life sciences, but we're very similar. We have J&J, Takeda, North American headquarters for UCB here in Atlanta. Obviously, UCB is the most important of those. Of course. And but we do hear about the shortages of skilled employees.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. Get back on track here. I know we certainly faced a shortage of employees as my companies grew here in Georgia. But back to what you were talking about, how can we continue to support the growth and advancement in the life sciences of the workforce development and talent, like the ways you mentioned?
Yeah, workforce development is critical, and it's not just in this industry, it's in every industry. We hear it as we continue to grow, and we're growing at such a clip that it's a constant struggle to have the number of folks and then the skill sets that move there. So we've got to tackle it from a couple of different ways. I think Governor Deal did an incredibly good job. My predecessor, Lieutenant Governor Cagle, did a really good job with workforce development, focusing on using kind of the technical schools and that kind of approach. I believe that the universities are doing a good job of creating kind of that talent pool that continues to move forward. But I love it when I hear these stories across the state where an industry partners with some sort of local approach or with higher ed. I think Georgia Tech's doing, for full disclosure, I went to Georgia Tech. So, but I think they do an incredibly good job of earning the trust of the private sector and working for, figuring out what is the exact problem we're trying to solve, right? And training an entire, kind of talent pool to be able to jump headfirst into those problems and to move forward. And that's a career path for somebody. But it's also from a business perspective or an industry perspective, it's a problem being solved. And so we need to continue to focus on it. The other thing is, you know, as we move forward in Georgia, it's not just an Atlanta story. And I want you as leaders in your industries and your companies to understand that Georgia is a great place. It's not just all an Atlanta story. And so I think as a state, as we're state decision makers, we're trying to look for ways to balance that growth as often, you know, as kind of as widespread as we possibly can. And so looking for ways to create all of Georgia's growth. You know, there's other parts of the state, there's other talents. And I think you'll see more flexibility from the state's perspective. And if, let's say, you wanted to relocate some sort of research or manufacturing to, you know, a Macon or a Valdosta, or you just pick your area outside of Atlanta, then I think the state's more apt to be able to partner with you on some sort of specialized workforce development technique to allow us to balance those jobs and balance that growth all across the state.
If I could add a little bit there, I think we need to help ourselves as well. So, I mean, we're obviously incentives and support, workforce development support, et cetera, from the state is critically important, certainly critically important to what GRA does. But when I say we need to help ourselves, what I mean by that is, you know, Georgia Bio has the Georgia BioEd Institute. It's our education arm for Georgia Bio, right? And you're the trainers. You're the teachers in this case because you come from industry. So Maria wants to tap the resources in this room and across our industry to help kids at high school age to learn about the opportunities in this sector. And then we continue that into college and beyond. But we have to start, and, you know, going back to the example of, you know, the kids, and my kids are the same way, who growing up in the technology world, they don't think there's a life science industry here for them. So the brain drain issue is real, right? We can do a great job of recruiting people here. You know, it's an attractive place to be. We have all the infrastructure that we need. But a lot of the kids we're educating in our colleges in life sciences, they're looking to Boston and California because they think, oh, well, there's not really anything for me here. And that's not true. We've got to show them these figures. We've got to introduce them to the industry and be more visible. So that visibility, number one, and being directly involved in helping to spread the word of the opportunities that aren't just advanced degree opportunities in our field. That's another, I think, misperception that we've had, that if you're not PhD, you know, there's no place for you in life sciences. And that's so far from the truth, but it's something that we have to do a better job of educating our community about.
Right. I'm glad you went there. And, you know, GRA has done a ton of tremendous work with our institutions here already. I'd like to go back to harboring that innovation and research, if we could, for a moment, and just maybe talking more specifics about the future of GRA under your guidance and leadership. And it sounds like, you already touched on it, but it sounds like Georgia Bio and GRA could have a really great, close relationship moving forward.
Yeah, no question. So I'm coming up, believe it or not, on 7 months at GRA after 5 years with Georgia Bio. I think you may know I spent almost 7 years at Bio Florida before that. So I've experienced the industry side and the research side in a couple of different states, and recognize that intersection, that relationship between industry and academia as being not only important but critical to the future success of our growth. So with GRA, what I've learned in those 6 or 7 months is that we have an outstanding foundation, a great team of people who are really delivering impactful results. And we've been pouring through our own numbers, you know, over the last couple of months to determine, well, okay, we know what we've invested into research, but what are those results? And you know, we'll get out here one day and we'll share some of those numbers with you, but they're outstanding. And in a nutshell, about $500 million of investment into research through GRA has translated to about $6 billion of economic impact. So if we can continue that, then we know we've got a great future ahead of us, because that economic impact is jobs at the universities, it's jobs in the industry itself, and then it's income and wealth that these companies create. We're trying to get them to market. So what we're looking to our future is build on the programs we have, the Eminent Scholars and the Venture Development Program, but what else can we do to support the startup and company growth environment? And that's in particular where I think our partnership with Georgia Bio becomes really important. We have a meeting on the calendar to discuss a joint mentoring program for life sciences. It's a great fit for GRA, it's a great fit for Georgia Bio. We can develop a program, a formal, structured program to help mentor young companies in life sciences and engage our community both from academia and from industry. That's just one example of where I think we can work really well together.
Great. Jeff, obviously we're talking about an industry that requires a huge amount of capital. Most biotech companies are startups or small businesses, as Russell mentioned, with no products, especially not on the market, and they require massive amounts of investments from the private sector in order to get through that tedious R&D process, which I think a lot of people aren't familiar with to the extent of it. Sometimes these investments would be over years and maybe even decades. Given your background, entrepreneurial background, what can we do in Georgia to increase access to this capital?
Yeah, we've got to do a lot better job of being able to attract capital here in Georgia. I mean, we're just not very sophisticated. And I think the root of the problem is just the lack of understanding with policymakers, right? If you walk into the Capitol and you asked in the House and the Senate floor to, what does venture capital mean, you would get a wide spread of ideas or answers. We need to do a better job. I think we need to have a more sophisticated program. We've got Invest Georgia now, which is out there. I believe it's just too small. It doesn't match the growth potential that we have here. It doesn't match the demand. I continue to hear stories about companies, great 5-person startups, that leave here and go to Austin or go to California or go to Boston, because if I was going to make a $5 million investment in a business, I'd want to be able to touch and feel it too, so I get it. We do have some strong VC partners in Georgia, but we don't have enough of them. And I think we need to be able to figure out, and so our team's working closely. My policy director is a guy by the name of Mike Dudgeon. Some of y'all might know Mike. Mike was a House rep, but he's also had 2 companies that he's taken one public from scratch, and he's taken another technology company and just had a successful exit out of it. So we understand the importance of VC. We understand the importance of venture. We understand the system that you've got to build around it, and we're going to continue to work hard. But yes, we do need to do a much better job, being more sophisticated.
So, Russell, what's being done now in this regards? What else can we do? It sounds like maybe it's not as easy as it sounds to raise $500 million.
It's not easy, and it's not a new problem. But look, we're a city of what, 6-something million people, right? There's a lot of wealth in this city. We all see it every day. So the money's here, but it's not organized. We haven't brought it together through the creation of meaningful funds that specifically target healthcare and life sciences. But we've started. We have Frank McDaniel's here. Frank chairs the Biomed Investor Network. Many of you know about that group. We started it about 4 years ago, and it's just one little piece of that puzzle at the angel investment level. We pulled together about 40 angel investors, high net worth individuals who care about healthcare investments. We got to do more of that. The problem I see at the Biomed Investor Network, we're seeing in funding too many companies outside of Georgia. So we've also got to, get those startups
Cultivate
to the
those
point
startups.
where we got to cultivate them. That's exactly right. We're getting the applications, but what we find is companies are coming to us at the wrong time, or they haven't completed a presentation, an investor presentation to us that hits all the important points. They've got to show us, well, what's either their clinical data or what's their clinical pathway. You got to have a strong management team, of course, and then the technology itself and the patent portfolio. And too often we're missing one or more components there. So we have to, that goes back to this mentoring and helping our companies to be prepared for gaining investment. And then I think we can attract more capital. I mentioned GRA's venture fund as well. It's about a $45 million fund. It was created in '09. The state is an investor in that fund as well. And we are looking at what the future growth can mean in that category, whether it's GRA Venture Fund or some new fund. It could be public-private. Maybe it's all private. I don't know. But I think there is opportunity so that we have capital coming out of our state from within Georgia. We figured out how to attract capital with good companies, good technology, but we want to be the source of capital as well.
Seems like the VCs and angels invest in a different way here than Silicon Valley, obviously, and Boston even. Obviously, investments in the life sciences could have potentially enormous returns, innovations that are making people healthier, right? We've been talking about it, but funding, education, and training in the life sciences here has not been significant enough to perhaps move the needle in Georgia a substantial amount. So when you look at other states and other regions in particular, maybe you guys could be specific about things that they are actively doing, and maybe what do we risk here in Georgia falling behind those other states? Russell?
You want me to take it?
Sure.
As I mentioned, I was in Florida for a while. Every state has sort of its unique approach to life sciences in particular. So I don't necessarily think that we're doing something wrong or that others are doing it better. Each state has to develop a strategy that fits their own environment. So we've studied, and we can continue to study, how did Boston grow? How did San Diego grow their industry? And there's some relevant information there, but we're not trying to duplicate that story. We're trying to create the Georgia story. So what we find is what programs are out there. Let's learn from best practice programs so that we don't fall behind and we stay relevant. And I've seen some out there. We talked about, Joe was talking a little bit about federal grants, and the ability to match federal grants, I think, is something we could explore. In South Carolina, the equivalent of GRA in South Carolina, they are facilities managers as well. Now we fund equipment, but we don't have that. Go back to that earlier point about having a place where we can all come together. I think that's definitely something that can't be understated as important to us. And in Tennessee, I've seen there's a program, I think they called it an IP parade, and I like this idea, some version of it, where we can get to our universities to pull the IP out. We have great tech transfer offices, and we know what to do with the technology once it's identified as having commercial potential. But the identification piece of that needs some work. So I think we've got to go in and identify that intellectual property that has commercial potential. And those are just a couple of examples I think we could implement here.
We love parades. Joe, what does the Georgia life sciences industry specifically need from state policymakers to move this needle that we've been talking about, to see significant sector growth that we all want, that this state needs?
I think we kind of touched on a lot of it, and one is raising awareness, even at the elementary level, in terms of life sciences. I believe this is a very exciting time to be in life sciences. We talk about the business side of it, which I think is important. We talk about the opportunities in terms of economic growth for the state, which is very exciting. But at the end of the day, it's the patient that we need to remember while we're all here. And just in 2018, the FDA approved it was a blockbuster year for new molecular entities at 58. Before that, it was 42 in 2017. And then when you go before that, you're looking at, on average, about 20 NMEs a year that's been approved by the FDA. The knowledge and understanding of the human body and the different targets in these different disease states is amazing to me. I sit in so many different conferences. I've been in the industry now for 27, 28 years, right out of college. And I remember saying to policymakers early on that their children and grandchildren would see these amazing breakthroughs in our industry, that we would see cures for things that we haven't even imagined possible. Today, with the explosion of technology, data, understanding of the human genome, I'm telling policymakers that within our lifetime, I think that we're going to see breakthroughs that we didn't think possible just a few years ago. Gilead's a fantastic company to look at. I consider them the poster child of what this industry can do in terms of curing a disease. Now, maybe the rollout was a little disastrous, but in terms of what it's been able to provide to humanity is amazing. And I think children need to hear those stories. You know, polio today is unheard of, right? We've eliminated it, eradicated it pretty much across the world. I think those are the kind of stories that will inspire kids in elementary, middle school, high school, college, university, research universities. Those are the stories that are going to keep people, that's going to draw them into the industry, and it's the stickiness there. And they're going to want to stay, and they'll want to be part of the solution. I don't think we can lose that. I think that's an important piece, not only to bring in new talent and young minds into our industry, but I think that story also will draw investment from investors. And I also think that if we can, that vision, if we can create that vision where people can really buy into it in Georgia, I think that in itself will help grow our ecosystem here in Georgia.
And we all know where Gilead's Hep C technology originated, right?
Emory.
I did not know that. It's amazing. But when you I'm with scientists a lot, and there's a lot of, the other side of it too is 1 in 10 drugs never make it to market. They'd actually end up in clinical 3 trials. So that's kind of an amazing number. Just at UCB was a $700 million investment in lupus, and we're in phase 3 trials. We thought we were on our way. Some of the anecdotal stories that were coming out were amazing, but we didn't hit our endpoints. Scrap the entire project, $700 million down the drain, like that. So it is a high risk, high reward industry, but when you hit it and you hit it right, you change lives, and many times you change lives forever.
So you mentioned Gilead a couple times. You know, they did have some negative press surrounding cost and things of that nature. And do you think there are some common misperceptions had by policymakers in this industry in particular? Joe?
So I don't work for Gilead, but I do know a couple.
But you stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, so I'd love your answer.
Here's my thoughts on Gilead. First of all, and remember, this is me on the outside just looking in. Okay, so understand that. The pricing to me I saw no issue with the cost of the drug, personally. Just when I looked at it, but you have to put it in context. You have to put it in context. And so when you look at the cost of a patient with Hep C, just an individual patient, just that one patient, and you look at that cost over lifetime, is significant. So, but then you can put an X power into the ratio. And that is that if you cure a patient, that patient is no longer able to infect other people within the population. If you just take that and you kind of extrapolate it out, and then you keep this person from infecting 3 people, and those 3 people infecting 12 people, and then just by one cure, it's pennies to me, the price of the product. In terms of the cost to the overall healthcare system, I just don't think the story was told the way it should have been told. I find it's just, again, it cures the disease. It's not this chronic treatment. It cures it. And not only does it cure it for the individual and cuts off the complications of that patient for the rest of their life, but it also helps to protect the rest of the population from that person infecting others. So that's just my general thought on that.
Very good point. So this one's kind of for all you guys. It seems as though life sciences industry is at kind of a crossroads at this point in time. I'd love to get everyone's input. There's heightened global competition, every year tougher regulatory standards, cost pressures, as we just mentioned. How do you see Georgia working to stay at the forefront of all of these challenges? Russell, do you want to start?
Well, I think we've touched on quite a bit of that. Georgia's we're not gonna sit back and we're not the kind of environment here where I think we just let the rest of the world grow around us and we'll just take the scraps. That's not in our nature. I mean, you look out the window and and you can see the evidence of that. We're a high growth state. We're a high growth industry. I think we're going to continue with that. And as Jeff said, I mean, why can't we be at the top of that list? We've got all of the ingredients, right? And so we've used that analogy many times about, in order to bake the cake, you need all the ingredients. And we took that analogy, I think it was last year, where we said, well, wait a second, we do have all the ingredients. So somebody's got to turn the oven on now, right? So we're ready to start baking. And so we did have to build all those components. They're not all perfect. We need more capital, right? We need to improve our workforce, the things we all just talked about up here. But now it's time to really pull it together into a cohesive strategy. And so partnering with one another to develop that strategy so that we are all going with one voice, I think is going to be our most critical and that will generate the most successful results. If all of our agencies, our organizations like Georgia Bio, like GRA, in the state of Georgia itself, if we all come together with one common message, then we're going to rise up to the top here, and it's not going to take us very long.
From a state government perspective, you don't want government running your business. I can assure you of that, looking at it from my perspective. But our job is not to run your business. It's not to over-regulate you. It's to simply, I believe, to help you develop the tools necessary to create the ecosystem that you've got, right? So we got to continue to better educate your kids. We got to continue to have a business-friendly environment so that when you try to get your suppliers to come in here and your partners and your research folks and other departments within your own business to come here, that we've got the right environment for you to grow here, right? That's really what our job is. It's to be a catalyst in the investment category. I don't think we're ever going to have a big enough checkbook, nor do you want us to, because government ties too many strings, right? Government always wants to, but it's to be a catalyst in that investment part to allow the environment to be right for those dollars to stay here. And you're right, there's a ton of dollars here. Took me a long time to find them on the campaign trail. A long time. But there's a ton of dollars here. It's a lot of family money. It's a lot of and you mentioned this earlier too. It seems like people invest differently in Georgia than they do in other parts, and I think they do. I think people invest in Georgia a lot with their heart, right? It feels like people are more about wanting to focus dollars on trying to solve specific problems that are meaningful to them. And obviously this industry has got tons of opportunities to compel to those folks. But our job is to stay out of your way and to be the catalyst and be able to help you to create the tools necessary.
Sounds like collaboration is a common theme among all of these hurdles. I'd love to finish with Jeff, if we could. Obviously, our members are thrilled to hear your focus on innovation and technology and your background. As we move through the 2019 off session and into the 2020 session, perhaps you could give us some of your top priorities or goals that you hope to accomplish and how, in particular, Georgia Bio members can help you accomplish those.
Well, appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to thank you all for the jobs that you're creating and the dollars that you're bringing. You're watching this presentation today and seeing those dollars that are being harnessed here in Georgia are awesome. And you're definitely a part of our story going forward. My focus is going to continue to be on three main areas. One is healthcare, no surprise there. Lots of ground to be gained on healthcare as we move forward. 11 million Georgians expect us to do something with healthcare. Not just, and I don't work for Republicans and I don't work for Democrats or independents, I work for everybody. And so everybody wants better healthcare, right? Affordability and access and all those things. So healthcare is going to be a continued focus. Education is going to be a continued focus. I look through the lens of a dad with 3 kids in public schools. So I'm in that grind. I got a junior, In high school, I've got a 7th grader and a 2nd grader, and that is a very wide spread. And then last but not least is I want Georgia to be the technology capital of the East Coast of this country. And I don't want to just create marketing flyers that kind of talk to it. I want to achieve it. I want your businesses and your partners and the folks that you're trying to work with across the globe point back to that. And if we're doing that, that means everything's hitting on all cylinders, right? We're training a workforce to a 21st century global standard. We're attracting investment. We're an innovation hub. Your companies, your industries are willing to come here and innovate right here. So that's going to be the continued focus as we move forward. Just continue. I want 11 million people to wake up with the same idea I do, and that's our best days are in front of us here in Georgia. And I want 11 million people to truly believe that. I think if we get on that same page, and we also need to make sure that folks realize we don't argue like folks do in Washington, D.C. Right? We don't agree on everything here in Georgia, but I just finished a legislative session, my first one, where we really we worked along partisan lines very, very well. We're able to have collaborative conversation and bipartisan support, and I think that's an important environment that we want Georgia businesses and industries to recognize what we do going forward.
I think just the details you gave about the session give us a lot of hope for that. Well, this was wonderful. I thank you guys. We have companies here in Georgia locally like UCB, organizations like GRA and Georgia Bio, and legislators that are on our side. It sounds like collaboration coming together to solve these problems as a group is the right plan. So thanks for your input. Really appreciate it. I thought this was wonderful. Hope you guys all did too. I think, Maria, do we have time for Q&A maybe?
Yeah, go ahead and do that first.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for the panel? Yes.
Going back to training the teachers and help the students and going to the Georgia BioEd, how do we get more of those programs across the state, to help get more students interested in life sciences?
Maria, you might have to step in a little bit on this, but Georgia BioEd does have a statewide initiative that it is rolling out, specifically targeting training for biomanufacturing. You want to talk a little bit about it, Maria?
Yes, thank you for queuing up what I was going to ask anyway, Steve. Steve is with Georgia Power and actually helps support our Education Institute. So as many of you know, we run high school level teacher training. Chuck Fogelgren over the last year is our past chair for the Education Institute with Quest Diagnostics, and our fearless current leader for education, Phil Gibson, who runs the biotechnology the Biotech Training Center over near Decatur out in Newton County. We've been working tirelessly for the last year to advocate some state investment into growing our workforce here around biomanufacturing, but we do anticipate being able to expand outside of just biomanufacturing training into other areas in life sciences, including devices, agricultural space, and industrial biotech too. So we really can, as you mentioned, Jeff, get across the state and get young people involved, not just here in the Atlanta, Athens region, but outside into rural Georgia as well. So we're looking to expand actually pretty dramatically in the next year. With a variety of supporters, but let me just say stay tuned for 30-something days to see, so we can kind of roll something out, which will be a big deal. So there are, I apologize, I can't be public about this quite yet, but there are some efforts. We run a great teacher training program, and which is complemented by our equipment depot, where, so you are aware, we collect surplus, unused, or gently used materials from our companies, and we donate them into classrooms across the state. So I have teachers that drive 4 hours each way to come get a BioBox from me to get gloves and masks and pipettes and pipette tips. So our teachers that train with us get access to our depot, which is supplied primarily through VWR and some donations from Fisher as well. So it's a really great program. We're looking to expand it. And if your company has pallets of expired gloves, let me know. I've got plenty of teachers that want them for free. So there are efforts, as you know, Steve. I think in the next 30 to 60 days, you'll be hearing a lot of noise about that, and we're excited to roll out some new things. And also this summer, UCB, thank you, Joe, are sponsoring another teacher training workshop for a week-long workshop that's completely driven by UCB and is housed at one of our technical colleges. But so we're really working on the workforce front. As Russell knows, this has been a bit of a passion project for me the last 13 years, so I'm really glad to see it growing. Workforce is a huge need across our nation. In life sciences, there are a lot of gaps at all stages of education, and we have a lot of great opportunities to set a precedent here that they don't even see out in California. I work closely with the institutes there, and they're very excited to see some of the things we'll be rolling out, actually. So I think we have a lot of opportunities there. And additionally, please know Georgia Bio, let us know what we can do to educate our policymakers more. We have a great relationship with Cornerstone, and we have new staff with Joseph on external affairs, but we can bring in patients, we can tell stories, we can arrange tours of our companies. We have some outstanding companies across the state with really interesting stories to tell. I was with Kesogen yesterday, and they have a great program for vets, for example, not veterinary, like veterans, and it's a cool genomics company and testing labs. So, and Congressman Woodall just went through there about a week or two ago, and he was fascinated. He had no idea it was in his own backyard. So please know that we're here to tell your stories as companies, and telling those stories, like you said, by pulling to the heartstrings is really very valuable because it's relatable for people. Mm-hmm. So we can be that catalyst, that connector, so we can educate your colleagues at the legislature, as well as showcase the talent in the companies we have here. Apologies. Any last minute other questions? I'm going to pass this back to you. Sorry.
Yes.
Hey, Ashish Advani. I have a healthcare startup. I'll pitch you guys soon. I think I had no idea. I was wondering, we sell to health systems, and I was wondering, I've been following the CON laws this year. I think many of us probably in this room have been. It didn't look like it did much in the legislative session. I was wondering if you think that there's a future there still for upcoming legislative sessions.
Yes, we worked very, very hard on CON reform. It was a vigorous conversation, and one that I think was definitely timely and needed to happen. Ultimately, part of the 22 bills that we passed were related to this. I think one of the best pieces of ground gained in the CON reform conversation was around transparency. We have a bill that's now been put in place. The governor and I are going to go down to CTCA and sign it, or he's going to sign it. I'm going to watch him sign it. Next week, and it really is about a transparency piece, and I think really what it's going to allow is a public conversation to happen. This isn't against anybody or for anybody. This is just about trying to provide the best healthcare network we possibly can around the state. And I think what we're watching is the rest of the country's kind of figured out CON reform, and we haven't really done a good job of adjusting to that kind of modern conversation. And yeah, you'll continue to watch a lot of efforts put forward.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Al Ostrov, Research Projects International from Georgia State University. I have a question about the innovators in our society, or particularly here, we're in Georgia. When an innovator gets a grant or funding, and when the funding runs out, what happens to the innovation? Is there any kind of system that we can really make sure that our innovators will follow through with the intention of what they're doing, so make sure that our society can enjoy all the things that our innovators are actually doing and not be stifled?
I'll touch on a bit of that. I mentioned earlier the idea of identifying, scouting for intellectual property at our universities and elsewhere. But to your point, not all IP makes it to the marketplace. Now, there are many reasons for that. In our industry, it may be clinical trial failures, or it could be just simply funding. Lack of funding. So we see a lot of good technology left on the table, so to speak. And I know our venture development team does, where a company makes it along the way and then hits a roadblock, and then the technology dies. So as far as I know, there is no clearinghouse, if you will, of that intellectual property. But it's something that I think there's a need for. I think that's a very valid point, where we can and then maybe tie that into this idea of scouting for technologies, not just new discoveries, but discoveries that haven't quite made it along all the way.
All right. Okay, one last question. Mike Gerber.
Yeah, just really just an observation. We try to tie together some of the pieces of this. That every time, in my opinion, I'm Mike Gerber, I do some consulting. Every time a company in this room donates a pallet of unused gloves to a school system, that becomes an opportunity for the governor, his colleagues in the Senate, members of the House to also go to that school with the company to talk to the kids, to be champions for science and technology and their education, and to actually bring together all the things we've talked about, particularly with your three priorities being healthcare, technology, and education. It just strikes me as a win opportunity that is essentially no cost, that can in fact invite members of the legislature and others to become advocates for what this organization is trying to do.
The more problems we can solve, the more ideas we can generate that don't utilize the resources of government are a win-win, right? And I come at that from a couple of different angles. One, I'm a fiscal conservative, so I don't want government to go and grow. But I watch that the private sector communities are so much better at solving problems and creating big ideas than government ever is. And so looking for ways to partner with the private sector in any way, shape, or form is, I think, huge. And I think it's something that Georgia can be recognized for in other parts of the country, right? We just create the environment that allows the private sector to come in and kind of instill that spark in that child as they go through. And even that PhD student working through that you know what, I want to keep going here. I want to keep going here. I want to keep going here. You mentioned an IP center. That's a great private sector, opportunity, right? My mind's sitting here thinking as an entrepreneur, hey, great idea. Why don't I come up with an incubator and take a 50% cut on whatever IP get, who knows? But that's a great private sector idea, right? Government's a terrible place to try to pull that stuff up because they just don't know how to process it. But the path of least resistance is to always lean on government, right? It's one of the things that drove me to run for politics. I was guilty like everybody else. I wrote my check at the end of the year on April 14th. I put it in the mailbox, and I just figured all the problems were solved. They're not. We got to figure out ways to tackle these things ourselves and not just lean into the government to do it.
Well, thank you for that. I think we can very much relate to that, having stood in the line at the Department of Transportation a few times and inefficiencies in some areas of government. But you are a great partner and part of the ingredients for this cake that we're making. We turn the oven on. Apologies, I'm just going with the analogy here. But we really do thank all three of you and our fearless moderator here, John, for being here today. This has been really valuable. I know we've had quite a few people online watching this around the state as well, so thank you again. Thank you to those on viewing it. I don't want to turn the PowerPoint on in your faces, but if someone is able to get the projector in a moment while y'all exit, I will at least thank our sponsors of the report. But thank you guys today. I apologize, I don't want you to be blinded. But finally, I just want to say, please save the date for our next breakfast meeting. It will take place on June 20th. It will be here again, and it will be all about drug innovation. And we have some speakers coming in from out of state, and we're going to be also having a couple of our innovators here from Georgia on stage talking about innovations in drug development and a touch on personalized medicine. And also save the date for our conference on October 8th. And I appreciate all the support we received from our sponsors at GRA, VWR, Bio, Georgia Power, GDEC, Johnson & Johnson, and a few others I might be forgetting for pulling this report off. And please stay tuned. We will do a big rollout when we have it ready for you online. And we'll see you in June at our next event. Thank you guys so much.
I think, when you told me this, I was thinking, have you ever seen the show?
I've got to run. I don't have to.